When I think about some of my favorite games growing up, there's one that stands out above all the others. It's Ultima IV Quest of the Avatar for the NES, and it's a sequel to Ultima III Exodus. It's an open-world RPG, and the main goal is to be a good person. There's no archvillain to defeat, no world that needs saving, not even a prince or princess to rescue. It might sound boring, but it actually was unlike any of the RPGs of the time.
Richard Garriott, the creator of the Ultima series, considers this to be among his favorites, and in part he designed it the way he did in response to angry parents who were outraged by the immoral behavior of the previous Ultima games. There was also heavy criticism being hurled at D&D in general, stating it was a bad influence, corrupter of youth, etc., etc. Inspired by Eastern religion, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and The Wizard of Oz, Garriott wanted role-playing to be about more than just killing monsters and hunting treasures. So what exactly is it about? After the world is unified by Lord British, he's concerned about the spiritual welfare of his people. He wants someone to step forward, be a paragon of virtue, to guide their daily lives and descend into the Stygian abyss to learn the ultimate meaning of life. And that's kind of where you enter.
Your goal is to master the 8 virtues, and I'm going to explore each of them individually, starting with honesty.
So I didn't actually play the original Ultima 4 on the PC. I played the Nintendo port developed by Pony Canyon and published by FCI in 1990. The graphics were redone with sprites reminiscent of JRPGs like Sweet Home, and it also helped that the gameplay and controls were streamlined to make the experience more intuitive. One of the first virtues players were faced with was honesty, and it became clear from the opening character creation screen that the game was very different. Rather than the typical assigning and populating of random stats, Quest of the Avatar began with something similar to a personality test. You had to ponder the ethical dilemmas, and the tarot-like structure was determined by moral choices. These decisions weren't simply a matter of good and evil, but rather questions like, what do you value more, honesty or justice? Your ethical preferences determine your destiny.
The way you conduct yourself is as important as your final goal. Take, for example, the magic system. You don't just cast spells, but you have to brew the ingredients together, which is kind of cool, even if it's a bit complicated. You have to learn which combos create which spells, which you learn from the various town people. And then you go to the shops to buy the regents. Having more is the key to winning, especially with some of the attack spells and heals. But when you go to the stores, you realize a lot of the shopkeepers are actually blind, so they'll ask you to count out the money and pay them the right sum. You could scam them, leaving 1 coin instead of the 100 you owe, but then your honesty takes a hit. I honestly felt guilty for scamming the blind shopkeepers to stock up on my magic spells, even though I did it every time.
Quest of the Avatar represents an evolution that melded role-playing with deeper narratives, a move that resonated with gamers seeking deeper stories and issues. What do you do if you've already defeated your 100th dragon, and your 1000th ogre army? Quandaries expanded from worrying about which enemies you needed to defeat, to how to handle issues like poverty with compassion.
The homeless and the sick are in most of the towns of Britannia. One of them tells you 2 of its kids are dead. Could you be kind enough to help save its remaining ones? No matter how much money you give him, he's still there every day. In another town, in sort of a strange twist, some guy tries to scam you, switching between his diseases. I know in retrospect the mechanic seems simple, but back then the chance to give to the poor was my sort of naive way of feeling like I was actually helping people. It made me wonder how with all this prosperity in the land, there were still so many who had so little.
What's most daunting about Quest of the Avatar is that you can do anything in any order you want, recruit or not recruit party members as you please. You make up the narrative and you determine the course of your journey, engendering a sense of immersion that made you feel like you are in more control than any previous RPG. There's so much to do and gather, from the colored stones to the runes of virtue, it can be overwhelming. You can use the moon gates, hijack a ship and sail the seas, and even ride an air balloon to reach obscure destinations. Combat is grid-based and probably the weakest link of the game. If you don't have projectile weapons, you have to move all the way to confront the enemy, which quickly becomes a chore. It's even more painful in sea battles where you're on boat and the enemies are in the ocean, where they can lunge fireballs at you from a distance. Valor dictates you never run away from battle, no matter how weak you are. I had to fight a lot of battles just to prove I wasn't a coward. Still, there were some cool mechanics present that weren't common among RPGs. First off, there's an auto option that lets the computer automatically act for you during battle. Also, you can fight anyone, including the villagers and even Lord British. Decades before Grand Theft Auto let you kill civilians, Ultima gave you that same freedom. Each of the towns has a distinctive feel, represented by their virtue. Humility's Magencia is filled with monsters destroyed by their past pride. The Buccaneer's Den is full of Rocco's pirates, and Justice's U is home to the High Court of the land. Before then, most games I played had generic villages, with the majority of the NPCs only there to initiate fetch quests, or tell you how to get to your next destination if they weren't just outright being obscure. In Quest of the Avatar, your interactions actually affect your character stats, and your relationships matter. There was a quantified method to the madness, each virtue having a counter that would change depending on your actions, but that number is never visible to the player, so I had no idea they were even calculating it, making the system feel organic. Adding to that sense of wonder was the fact that you are required to search places you normally never visit, including a prison, poison swamps, and a fiery forge, burning yourself in the process. A trio of volcanoes even hid the deadliest item in the game, a skull that would induce the apocalypse. The humility to explore every location, no matter how obscure, was an essential trait in becoming the Avatar. There's a vast network of 7 underground dungeons that are connected through 3 altar rooms, and it was a struggle finding the necessary stones within each one. But if you kept at it, you'd stumble your way into the underground shrines protected by strange guardians who'd question you. Honor was one of those virtues that was tougher to pin down, especially as enemies rarely fled like they did in the PC version. But there was honor in questing and sticking with the journey. The whole world was connected by the respective altars of truth, love, and courage, a fitting allegory for the way the virtues seeped into one another. It's not a complex ethical system, but there was something visually gratifying seeing that love, truth, and courage bridged all these disparate parts. I know persistence isn't one of the official virtues the game encourages, but it should be. You'll need to sacrifice a lot of your time if you want to beat this game. Looking back all these years later, I couldn't help but wonder, how in the world did I ever finish it as a kid? The puzzles are very difficult, some of the dungeons are impossible to navigate. Fortunately, the developers gave you a few tools, the most helpful being one of the best manuals ever included with the game.
I'm cutting away here because I kind of want to show you guys the manual directly as well as the box. And I know things are going towards a more digital trend, and it totally makes sense. It's more convenient, it's less wasteful. But at the same time, I love these as a kid, you know? Going to Toys R Us or wherever it was, and picking out the box or reading sort of the back summary, and even looking at the art here. I don't know if you can see it, but actually the main character, they named her Punky of all things, and it boasts more than 2 megabits of memory, over 100 hours of game time, which I believe. 5-year lithium battery, 84-page full-color, richly illustrated hint book, which is this, and it's a fantastic hint book. There's a couple games that I remember absolutely loving their hint books or loving their instruction manuals, and one of them obviously was Zelda, and Zelda 2. Obviously you open them up and there's all this great art, and it kind of hints at this world, kind of shows you all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, and what leads up to it. And Ultima Quest of the Avatar has a similar sort of manual. From the beginning, you kind of see there's like a whole prologue that gives you a sort of history, as well as summaries of Ultima 1 through 3. Here's a sort of character guide and with stats for each of the characters, short descriptions of characters like the Paladin and the Ranger and the Shepherd. And there's also like a sort of monster list that kind of shows you how strong each of the monsters and enemies are, which was really helpful. Like here, I didn't even know what these monsters were called, but I guess they're called Gazers and Zorns. There's dragons and Balrogs, which are extremely powerful. And there's also this really helpful ingredient list. All the magic spells, you actually have to kind of sort of brew them together. So this kind of gives you sort of a guide, as well as this map. The map is indispensable in the sense that it shows you how to use the moon gates, and at the beginning of the game, the only way you can travel anywhere is through these moon gates because you don't have a boat. And it's sort of your way of traveling from one town to the other, and so this kind of shows you how like the 2 different moons phase up, and then that'll kind of direct you. That's the great thing about this manual, is it actually gave you enough hints where if you got stuck in a certain area, you can actually look back to this and sort of get hints. But it didn't hold, I mean, it kind of did hold your hand, but not necessarily in a way that prevented you from having your own experience. And I know like manuals have gone mostly digital these days, and it looks great, it's all crisp, and you can click through everything, it's very convenient, but there's something just, I think, almost magical about having these manuals sort of growing up. So I'm really glad I have this, and I highly recommend. You can actually find PDFs or like screenshots of this online. So if you ever do play it, I recommend you check it out.
I always thought it funny that it was not enough of a sacrifice to save the world, fight off monsters, and help the weak. You needed to donate blood at the donor bank too. Once you sacrifice enough blood and fulfill all your other duties, you achieve avatarhood and descend down into the Stygian abyss. There you'll fight against some of the toughest enemies in the game, including the final battle pitting you against pixelated reflections of you and your companions. Being a messiah meant you had to destroy the 8 embodiments of your 8-bit soul. It wasn't a tough battle, especially with the tremor spell, but a poetic one that culminated in sacrifice. You would never be the same again. I've often wondered why I love this game so much. One big reason is the underrated soundtrack, which has some of the best music around on the Nintendo. But it was also because it represented a different type of ideal, forcing me to rethink my view of the world while also expanding the possibilities of gameplay and story. What was the future of RPGs? The fact that I didn't know the answer, that the potential seemed limitless, was super exciting to me. In the end sequence, Lord British challenges you by stating the quest of the Avatar is forever. I'm still striving, still hoping to live up to its ideal.